Hello, my name is Penelope, and I'm 31 years old. My life looked perfect on paper. I worked in software development at one of the major tech companies in San Francisco, and over 7 years, my career had brought me a consistently high income and a reputation as a specialist in love with her work. My domain was a spacious apartment in the upscale Soma, the one with panoramic windows offering a view of the emerald expanse of the bay, a modern, expensive, impeccable space one is supposed to dream of when thinking of life in the heart of Silicon Valley. But behind this impeccable facade lay a different truth. I hated living there. The city noise was like an incessant living creature. Ambulance sirens pierced the night. The rumble of traffic was a constant background in my ears, and muffled, sometimes desperately loud shouts from people carried from the street at all hours. In this cacophony, I lost myself. Sleep became anxious and intermittent, my thoughts tangled, finding no way out. My world had narrowed to a single, almost physically palpable desire, to immerse myself in absolute, piercing silence. My family, it seemed, was nearby. My parents still lived in the very house I grew up in, just a 40-minute drive from my glass bastion. My older sister Jennifer, who had recently turned 38, was raising 3 children alone after a difficult divorce. We didn't see each other as often as we probably should, limiting ourselves to rare phone calls where I carefully avoided the sharp edges of my own discontent. After months of exhausting insomnia and accumulated irritation, I made a decision that had festered like a boil. I contacted a realtor and, carefully choosing my words, laid out my desire. I needed something quiet, a country house, away from the city hustle, a place where I could finally hear the silence and my own thoughts. The search took several weeks, but in the end, she sent photos of what, at first glance, seemed the embodiment of a dream. A small but cozy house just an hour's drive from the city. Critically important was the high-speed internet, allowing for remote work. The house was surrounded by a garden, old trees, and the neighbors lived at a respectful distance. It was exactly that. The problem boiled down to finances. I could manage the mortgage on the new house, but it would mean living under constant strain. And then it hit me. My Soma apartment was a prime piece of real estate. If I rented it out, the rental income would more than cover the country mortgage. I hired a reputable management company to handle all affairs, and my lawyer drew up an ironclad lease agreement protecting my interests and property. With my last savings, I did a cosmetic renovation to make the apartment look impeccable and installed a modern security system with cameras and smart locks, the full package. The next step was to visit my parents. I found my father in his usual rocking chair and my mother in the kitchen, brewing fragrant tea. Sitting down in the living room, I outlined my plan to them. A house outside the city, renting out the apartment to cover the loan. "That's smart, Penelope," my father said, nodding approvingly. "I'm proud of you for thinking so far ahead about your future." "But you're going to rent it out to strangers?" my mother worried, her eyebrows creeping upward. "What if they ruin everything? What if they turn out to be terrible people?" "That's precisely why I hired a management company," I explained patiently. "They conduct a thorough screening of all candidates, and I have that very agreement that will protect me." Before my mother could voice new doubts, the front door swung open with a bang. Jennifer stood on the threshold, surrounded by her 3 children. A moment, and the living room's silence was shattered. The children rushed in with shrieks, pushing each other aside, grabbing everything in sight from the shelves. The atmosphere transformed from serene to chaotic in a matter of seconds. Jennifer, breathless, caught the tail end of our conversation. "Wait, you're renting out your apartment? The one in Soma?" "Yes," I confirmed. "It will help pay for the house outside the city." She plopped down on the sofa next to me, pushing a cushion aside. "You should rent it to me and the kids." I blinked in surprise, feeling the ground slip from under my feet. "What?" The word hung in the air, heavy and absurd, as Jennifer's children screeched and ran around the sofa. I looked at my sister, trying to understand if she was joking, but her gaze was resolute and demanding. "Yes, our current apartment is pure hell," she continued, and familiar notes of complaint sounded in her voice. 3 kids crammed into 2 tiny bedrooms. It's madness. And yours is just huge. And it's such a great school district. She looked at me reproachfully. My kids would get a much better education there. Opportunities they don't have now. The world around me seemed to shrink, focusing on this absurd demand. Jennifer, I began, trying to speak calmly, though my fingers clenched into fists on their own. I am renting it out specifically to cover the country mortgage. The rental income is critical for me. Are you serious right now? Her face contorted as if I had suggested something monstrous. The friendly mask she had put on when entering evaporated without a trace. You're going to charge rent from your own sister? Your own flesh and blood? Yes, Jennifer, I replied, feeling a cold weariness rising within me. That's exactly how renting works. It's a financial agreement, not family aid. This is just greed, Penelope, she blurted out, her voice becoming shrill. You earn incomparably more than I do. You can easily afford 2 mortgages. And I'm alone, raising 3 kids, and you can't even help me, your own sister. Her words were still vibrating in the air when my mother, who had been silently observing until then, joined the fray. Penelope, Jennifer is right, she said, in a soft but unyielding tone I had known since childhood. You must help your sister. She has 3 children on her hands. It's your duty. I felt the walls of my parents' living room beginning to press in on me. I am not a charity, Mom, I said, and my voice sounded alien and harsh even to me. This is an investment. I need stable rental income for my financial well-being. You just don't understand how hard it is, Jennifer attacked again, her voice thundering, drowning out the children's screams. You live in your fancy apartment with your fancy job, and your whole life revolves around money. You have no idea what real family, real hardship, real responsibility is. Her words held such concentrated bitterness that for a moment I found it hard to breathe. But I straightened up to my full height. Jennifer, my answer is no. Final. God tells those who have to share with those who have not, my mother chimed in again, her face expressing disappointment. You have been granted much. It is your duty to help family in need. I rose from the sofa. The conversation was exhausted, spent, just like my strength. This conversation is over. I will rent my apartment to paying tenants. My decision is final. You ungrateful girl, Jennifer shouted at my back as I walked towards the exit. Her voice cracked into a screech. We're family, and you treat us like some worthless beggars. You're greedy and heartless. I didn't turn around or answer. I simply walked out the door, slamming it behind me, leaving behind the clamor of children's voices and the heavy residue of family discord. The whole way back, as the car carried me along the illuminated streets, I mentally replayed that conversation, word for word. A part of me, small and vulnerable, shrank with guilt. Jennifer really did have it hard. Her life was a constant battle, and the children certainly deserved better conditions. But another, larger and rational part, the one that had built its life brick by brick over the years, understood. My decision was the only right one. I had worked hard all those years, denying myself much to afford that apartment. I had saved, maintained a strict budget, made considered financial decisions. And Jennifer wanted me to simply gift her the fruits of my labor, as if my success was supposed to be the default solution to all her problems. I moved to the country house the following week. The first days were filled with unfamiliar sensations. It was strange to be so far from the city's eternal rumble, but the surrounding silence was truly a balm for my wounded soul. In the mornings, I heard not sirens, but birds singing outside the window. At night, stepping onto the porch, I saw above me not a sky blurred by city light pollution, but countless diamond stars. And I slept. I slept a deep, serene sleep I had been deprived of for many years. A few days into this idyll, my phone rang. The screen showed the name Michael from the management company. Penelope, I have great news, his brisk professional voice sounded. I think I found the perfect tenants for your apartment. Really? I was surprised. So quickly? Yes, it's a young couple, both engineers at Google, impeccable credit histories, stable jobs, excellent references from previous residences. They really liked the photos of the apartment I provided. They would like to see it in person this Friday at 2 in the afternoon. Sounds wonderful, Michael, I replied, feeling the stone of anxiety begin to roll off my soul slightly. Their names are Mr. and Mrs. Chin. They seem very professional, well-mannered people. I'm sure you'll like them. Friday arrived. I came into the city early in the morning, and the meeting with Michael was scheduled in the cool, loft-style lobby of my former building. The Chins appeared right on time, and the first impression was impeccable. Mr. Chin, in an impeccably fitting suit, shook my hand with confident but unobtrusive firmness, and Mrs. Chin, dressed in an elegant and understated dress, spoke softly and thoughtfully, exuding intelligence and reliability. They were exactly the kind of tenants one could only dream of. We rode the silent elevator to my floor. A slight excitement mixed with hope tingled my nerves. I inserted the key into the familiar lock, pushed the heavy door, and, gesturing for the guests to enter, began to say, "Please, come in, welcome." But the words got stuck in my throat, choked by shock. My once impeccable apartment looked as if a hurricane of chaos had swept through it. The designer coffee table, made of solid walnut, for which I had once paid $2,000, was rudely pushed against the wall, and on its glossy surface now stood a half-open box of sugary cereal and a bag of milk. My elegant sofa from Granger was covered with a cheap children's blanket with bright cartoon characters, and the floor was littered with scattered plastic toys. Jennifer, lounging in the center of this picture of destruction in worn-out sweatpants, was indifferently munching on chips, staring at the huge TV screen from which a raucous cartoon song blared at full volume. Her youngest daughter, Emma, with a focused expression, was drawing purple scribbles with a marker on the pages of one of my art folios, that very heavy book in a leather binding that had once cost me $400. Michael and the Chins froze behind me in stunned silence. Jennifer finally tore her gaze away from the screen. Her face showed not a trace of embarrassment or guilt, only a slight, almost disdainful irritation, as if we had disturbed her privacy. "Mom gave me the spare key," she uttered casually, as if stating the obvious. "We moved in yesterday. This is our home now." Mrs. Chin quietly touched her husband's hand, and her eyes showed genuine regret and awkwardness. "We should go," she said softly, but firmly. "Please wait, I can explain everything," I began, trying to find any words in my head, but they were already hopeless. The couple turned and headed for the elevator. "We apologize," Mr. Chin said politely but coldly over his shoulder, and they disappeared into the gloom of the corridor. Michael translated his bewildered gaze from me to Jennifer and back to me. I'll call you later," he muttered, and hurried to retreat. The door clicked shut with a dull thud. Now, in the apartment filled with the blare from the TV and the children's shrieks, only Jennifer and I remained. Her offspring continued to race around the living room, shamelessly trampling my past underfoot. "Get out," my voice sounded, quiet but clear, cutting through the noise. "Immediately." Jennifer snorted with a contemptuous smirk. "No, Mom allowed us to live here. It's family property. We share everything." "This is my property, legally and by right. I own it. You are committing illegal trespassing." "Oh, come on, Penelope. Don't be so dramatic. We're family. You won't actually do anything." She demonstratively turned back to the TV, completely dismissing me, as if I were the uninvited guest disturbing her peace. "If you dislike it so much," she threw out, not granting me a glance, "call the police. Go ahead." Something cold and heavy like a river stone finally settled in my chest. Fine. If she wants me to call the police, I'll take her advice. I took out my phone and with perfectly calm fingers dialed 911. Jennifer's smirk instantly evaporated. She jumped up from the sofa abruptly, all pretense of nonchalance gone from her face. "Stop! Are you out of your mind? What are you doing?" 911, what is your emergency?" A neutral dispatcher's voice came through the receiver. "I need to report an illegal trespass on my private property," I said clearly and distinctly, looking straight at the pale Jennifer. "There are several individuals in my apartment who entered without my permission and refuse to leave." "The address," I began. "Penelope, stop!" Jennifer made an impulsive step towards me, trying to snatch the phone. But I deftly stepped back, maintaining distance. I gave the dispatcher my address, apartment number, and firmly confirmed that I would meet the arriving officers downstairs in the lobby. The children, who had been carelessly running around the apartment until then, fell silent at once, then started crying loudly, intuitively sensing the icy hostility between the adults that had reached its peak. "You can't do this!" Jennifer's voice cracked into a high, panicked screech. "I'm your sister. We're of the same blood." "You yourself suggested I call the police," I cut her off, and my voice sounded alien and metallic. "I merely followed your advice. This is no longer a family dispute, Jennifer. This is a matter of property rights." I turned and walked out into the corridor without looking back. Descending in the elevator, I looked at my hands. They were trembling slightly, but inside there was a strange, scorched emptiness and an unfamiliar calm, as if I had finally shrugged off a heavy burden that had been weighing on me for years. About 10 minutes later, 2 police officers entered the lobby. One, older, with a tired but experienced look and a badge on his chest that read Martinez, and his partner, a young Officer Thompson, with an impassive, professional expression. "I'm Penelope Carter," I introduced myself, presenting my driver's license. "I am the owner of apartment 714. There are people inside who entered without my permission and refused to leave." I opened the app on my smartphone with digitized property documents showing clear scans. Officer Martinez studied them carefully and nodded. "Understood. Let's go sort this out on site," he said, in his somewhat muffled, calm voice. We rode up in the elevator in oppressive silence. When I opened the apartment door again, Jennifer froze in place. Her face, contorted with rage just a second before, instantly turned pale as soon as she saw the uniforms. "I'm Officer Martinez," the senior one introduced himself. "Ma'am, the owner of this residence is asking you to leave. You need to gather your personal belongings and exit." "But she's my sister," Jennifer cried out, her voice trembling. "This is our family matter. You can't interfere." "Family relations do not negate property rights," Officer Thompson objected softly but firmly. "If the owner demands that you leave and you refuse, it qualifies as illegal trespassing." "You're just destroying my life," Jennifer shrieked piercingly, now addressing me. She made a sharp lunge in my direction, but Officer Thompson deftly intercepted her arm, blocking the movement. "Ma'am, please calm down. Don't make this worse." Jennifer, frantic with rage and despair, tried to break free. She resisted, reached out, shouting accusations of betrayal and family destruction at me. Officer Martinez immediately reacted, coming to his partner's aid. Within seconds, practiced to automaticity, they twisted her arms behind her back, and cold steel handcuffs clicked around Jennifer's wrists. "You are under arrest for illegal trespassing and resisting arrest," Martinez stated evenly. The children, who had been watching this scene, burst into full-blown tears. All 3, frightened and confused, reached for their detained mother. Jennifer herself was also sobbing, but through the tears, she continued to shout words full of hatred at me. At that moment, my phone rang. The screen showed Mom. I answered and put the call on speakerphone. "Hello." "Penelope, what have you done?" My mother's voice was piercing, hysterical. "Jennifer just sent me a message that the police are there." I called the police, as she herself suggested. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't given her my spare key without my knowledge or consent. "How dare you say that?" my mother screamed. "She's your own sister. Those are your nieces and nephew." Jennifer is 38 years old. She is an adult, capable woman and a mother of 3. She bears full responsibility for her actions and their consequences. "Heartless, selfish brat." "This is your fault," I coldly interrupted her, and for the first time, steel rang in my voice. Your blind, enabling kindness turned Jennifer into a spoiled and irresponsible person, and now into a criminal. She is being arrested because you taught her from childhood that she can take whatever she wants with impunity, without regard for anyone else's rights. I hung up, not waiting for a reply. Jennifer was still sobbing as the officers led her out. The children were in complete hysterics. "Listen to me carefully," I said to Jennifer, looking straight into her tear-filled eyes. "You will never again enter my life or touch my property without my direct permission. From this day on, all responsibility for you and your children lies solely with Mom and Dad." The officers took her away. I handed Officer Martinez a business card with my parents' phone numbers so they could come and pick up their grandchildren. About half an hour later, my parents burst into the apartment. My mother, without looking at me, rushed with sobs to the children who, tired from crying, were now just quietly whimpering, buried in the cushions of the stained sofa. My father stopped on the threshold, and his gaze slowly, with painful bewilderment, slid over the trashed living room. Toys lay everywhere. Crumbs and stains speckled the expensive furniture upholstery, and on the floor lay the open art book, defaced with inappropriate, bright scribbles. "What have you done, Penelope?" he finally exhaled, and his voice held not malice, but deep fatigue. "I protected my private property in full accordance with the law," I replied, and my voice sounded detached and clear. "Nothing more." "But we're family," he uttered quietly, like an incantation. "Family." "I've heard that word too often in my life, Dad," I coldly parried. "And you yourselves, you alone, made Jennifer what she is. You hopelessly spoiled her. You always shielded her from the slightest consequences of her own actions. You made her believe that someone else would always come and clean up any mess, even the most monstrous one. Well, now that has come to an end. You can take these children, and you can also concern yourselves with finding and paying for a lawyer for your eldest daughter." My mother looked up at me, and in her eyes, usually kind and soft, burned pure, undisguised hatred. "You are no longer our daughter," she hissed, and every word was like a whip strike. And strangely enough, instead of the expected sharp pain, I felt only a vast, all-filling relief, as if I had shrugged off a multi-pound burden. "Good," I nodded. "On that, we are finally in agreement." I turned and walked away to the window, my back to them, to this chaos they themselves had created. They quickly, almost fussily, gathered the children's things, and without saying another word, led them out into the corridor. The door closed. I was left alone amidst my once impeccable, now ruined sanctuary. And I felt nothing but cold, indifferent satisfaction that the line had finally been drawn. That same day, I called the locksmith, who replaced all the locks, restoring my sense of control and security. Then I methodically, without a single emotion, packed all of Jennifer's and her children's few belongings into cardboard boxes and sent them by courier to my parents' address. The next morning, I got a call from Michael at the management company. "Penelope, I'm terribly sorry about what happened yesterday," he began, and his voice held sincere awkwardness. "That is an utterly unprofessional situation, and you are not at fault in any way." "Thank you, Michael," I replied simply. "I promise you, I will find the perfect tenants. Give me a week, no more. I will present you with the most reliable and decent people." After that call, I sat in my country living room and suddenly realized with striking clarity how quiet it was here. No calls from parents, no endless messages from Jennifer pleading for financial help. For years, they had been in constant contact, always demanding something, always expecting me to solve their pressing problems. Now, there was only peace, and it was blissful. A few days later, I made a spontaneous decision and booked a tour to Hawaii, choosing a cozy resort on Maui. I spent a whole week there, doing absolutely nothing, swimming in the turquoise ocean waters, reading to the sound of the surf, sleeping until noon. No work emails, no family dramas, only long-awaited healing peace. When I returned to my country house, the phone remained silent. No missed calls from parents, no angry voicemails from Jennifer. As if they had finally learned the rules of the game I had set. I easily returned to my usual rhythm of life, working from home, taking long evening walks, enjoying the very quiet, measured life I had so long strived for. Exactly 1 week after my return, Michael called again. "Penelope, I found them. The perfect tenants. It's a couple from Japan. Both hold managerial positions in a major tech company. Impeccable references. Flawless credit history. And here's the best part. They are offering to pay 20% above the current market rate and are willing to pay the rent for 2 years in advance." I nearly dropped the phone from my suddenly weakened fingers. Sorry, did you say for 2 years in advance? I asked, not believing my own ears. Exactly. Michael's voice held triumphant animation. They are moving to San Francisco on a long-term work contract and value stability above all. They are incredibly fond of your apartment. They've already seen it through photos and videos and are fully ready to sign the agreement. I will send you all the documents today. This is precisely the impeccable situation we dreamed of. 2 days later, all formalities were settled, and a substantial bank transfer hit my account. My country mortgage was fully covered for 2 years ahead. For the first time in many months, I could breathe a full breath, feeling the stone of financial anxiety finally roll away from my soul. 6 months flew by unnoticed, like one calm, peaceful day. I worked in the silence of my office, lived in my cozy house, and gradually, a long-forgotten feeling strengthened within me that my life belonged exclusively to me. No theatrical family dramas, no endless demands, no relatives expecting me to forever solve their pressing problems. And then, in this idyll, the phone rang. The screen showed the name, Aunt Margaret. She lived in far-off Boston, was my mother's older sister, but had always been radically different from the rest of the family. Smarter, more perceptive, and independent. She had built a successful business through her own labor and never tolerated others' manipulations and whining. I had always respected her sincerely since childhood. Aunt Margaret, hello. How are you? All is well, dear, but I'm calling to talk to you about that unpleasant business with Jennifer. First of all, I want you to know, I've heard all the versions. Your mother called me in hysterics trying to portray you as a heartless monster. But I know her methods. I know Jennifer, and I am absolutely sure you did the right thing by protecting your property and your boundaries. Thank you for saying that, I said, and a lump unexpectedly formed in my throat. You have no idea how much that means to me. As for Jennifer, she managed to avoid formal criminal charges, Aunt Margaret continued in her even, measured tone. Given that it was her first offense, and with 3 young children, the prosecutor decided not to take the case to court, limiting it to a warning. However, her life hasn't improved because of it. Quite the opposite. In what sense, I clarified, though I vaguely guessed the answer. Rumors, as they do, spread throughout the family. Everyone knows now how she moved into your apartment on her own, and how she was arrested in front of her frightened children. Many who used to help her are now turning away, stopped lending money, stopped offering their support. I, of course, didn't spread anything, but you can't hide an awl in a sack. Her previous landlord somehow found out about the arrest. Aunt Margaret's voice became a bit harder, and refused to renew her lease. He stated directly that he didn't want to deal with tenants involved in such stories. And where is she living now? I asked, gripping the phone with my fingers. They are crammed into a tiny apartment on the very outskirts of the city. The neighborhood is, to put it mildly, troubled. The building is old, dilapidated. The schools in that district are no good. It's certainly incomparable to what she so arrogantly counted on by seizing your home. And my parents? How are they? They started helping her significantly less. Notes of bitter irony sounded in Aunt Margaret's voice. They're worried about their own reputation, about what people will say. They can't afford to support her financially, and, I suppose, are deeply embarrassed by all that happened. So Jennifer is now largely left to her own devices. I fell silent for a moment, digesting what I had heard. A part of my being, the part that was an aunt, shrank with acute pity for my nieces and nephew. They were just innocent children. They didn't choose their mother and weren't responsible for her actions. But Jennifer had made her own adult conscious choice. She decided she could break into my home, appropriate what didn't belong to her, and live in the certainty that she could always do whatever she wanted with impunity. Penelope, are you still there? Aunt Margaret asked softly. I wanted to tell you one more thing. Remember, you are not obligated to sacrifice your life for a family that respects neither you nor your boundaries. You achieved everything in your life yourself, working incredibly hard and making considered, intelligent decisions. You owe your success to no one merely on the basis of shared blood. Thank you, I exhaled, and my voice trembled with the emotions that washed over me. Thank you for saying that. it truly means a lot to me. Your mother and Jennifer made their choice, Aunt Margaret continued, and her words sounded like a final, impartial verdict. And you made yours. You chose to protect your own boundaries and your lawful property. And that is not selfishness, dear. It's common sense and an act of healthy will. We talked for a few more minutes, exchanged news about her business and my work, and when I hung up, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if I had shrugged off an invisible but unbearably heavy burden. I slowly looked around my living room in the country house. The quiet, softly lit rooms, the leisurely rustle of foliage outside the window, the blessed atmosphere of peace that I had built brick by brick with such difficulty and persistence. Thoughts of my family no longer tormented me, no longer burned me from within. I wasn't interested in how they were living, whether they missed me or continued to judge me. I had finally and irrevocably moved forward along the current of my own life. The only splinter in my heart remained my nieces and nephew. They were absolutely innocent in this destructive war of adult ambitions and grievances. They had witnessed the humiliating arrest of their own mother. They had lost their familiar home and were forced to move to a squalid dwelling in a troubled neighborhood. But I thought, perhaps, growing up, they would be able to look at what happened differently. Perhaps they would realize that I wasn't a soulless monster in this story. Maybe they would want to build a bridge and establish new, healthy relationships with an aunt who wasn't afraid to draw her boundaries and protect her right to personal space. And if such a time came, I would be ready to open my door to them. But for now, for me, it was all over. The end of endless family squabbles. The end of being the eternal savior who was shamelessly used. The end of sacrificing the fruits of my own success for those who saw in them only a means to solve their problems. 2 years have passed since then. 2 years of measured, productive, shock-free life in my country refuge. The Japanese couple renting my apartment turned out to be the embodiment of ideal tenants. They paid punctually every month, kept the place in impeccable condition, and never created the slightest problem. Michael sent reports from time to time, and they were always blissful. The apartment was in excellent condition. The tenants were eager to renew the lease for several more years. My career also went uphill. During this period, I received 2 consecutive promotions, and my financial situation became even more secure. Working remotely suited me perfectly. I became incredibly productive, gained long-awaited concentration, and felt happier than I had in the past decade. There was no news from my parents, not a single call, not a short message, as if I had been erased from their reality, ceased to exist. And, strangely enough, it suited me perfectly. Moreover, I felt liberated. I had spent so many years feeling an imposed sense of duty and a gnawing guilt for my success, against the backdrop of Jennifer's incessant struggle. Now I finally realized that guilt had been skillfully instilled in me by those who saw me only as a tool to achieve their goals. I owed them nothing. Everything I had, I earned myself. They made their choice, and I made mine. Sometimes my thoughts still turned to Jennifer and her children. I wondered how they were managing in that cramped apartment on the outskirts, if the children were getting enough attention and care, if they had adapted well to their new schools. But I made no attempts to contact them. That door was slammed shut forever. Jennifer, by her actions, had clearly shown her true face. A person who believes they have the right to appropriate what belongs to others merely because they want it. One who sincerely believes that family ties give them carte blanche for any actions without the slightest responsibility. I had let her face the consequences, and apparently the lesson hadn't done her any good. Aunt Margaret called me a few times over these 2 years. She shared family news, though I never asked her to. My parents had moved to a more modest house. They couldn't afford the upkeep of their previous home, especially after losing my financial support. Jennifer was still dragging out an existence in the same dilapidated apartment, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. The children attended average public schools that couldn't provide a quality education, but they were somehow holding on. "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked once during one of our conversations. "About calling the police on her?" "I've gone back to that moment again and again, going over every detail in my memory," I said, and my voice sounded firm and precise without a shadow of doubt. "And no, Aunt, I don't regret anything, not a single cell of my soul. If I had faltered then, she would still be trampling my boundaries, using me as a bottomless resource. My parents would continue to enable her irresponsibility, and I would have remained an eternal victim, forced to sacrifice my own life and all my achievements on the altar of someone who flatly refuses to take any responsibility for herself and her children. "Well," Margaret replied with a light, approving smile in her voice, "that is the only correct and sane answer there can be." Evening came, and I, settled in a comfortable rocking chair on the spacious porch, watched as the last rays of the setting sun slowly slid behind the line of hills. My country house offered a truly magnificent view. Endless canopies of ancient trees, the smooth curves of hills covered with an emerald carpet, and the boundless sky blazing at this hour with a dazzling palette, from delicate pink and lilac hues to fiery orange and purple flares. Absolute peace and blessed silence reigned, the very one I had so passionately dreamed of when acquiring this refuge. My phone lay on the old wooden table, silent and calm. No demanding calls, no attempts to manipulate by playing on guilt, no sudden crises forcing me to drop everything and rush to solve other people's problems. I allowed myself to mentally transport myself to an alternate reality and imagine what my life could have been like if I had shown weakness back then, in my parents' living room, and yielded to Jennifer's brazen demand. If I had let her live in my apartment for free, I would have been struggling to pay 2 mortgages, probably living in a state of permanent stress, overloaded with work to the limit, exhausted and drained, while Jennifer would have continued to shamelessly use me, asking for more and more, firmly convinced that I would forever exist only to solve her endless problems. But instead of that phantom nightmare, I gained everything I had now. This incomparable peace of mind, financial stability, a life I had built with my own hands and which flowed exclusively by my own rules. From time to time, I still remembered my nieces and nephew. They were growing up. The eldest girl must be 11 by now. Perhaps, growing up and gaining independence, they themselves would want to find me and hear my version of those long-ago events. Perhaps they would be able to see beyond the image of the cruel aunt imposed on them by their mother, a real person who wasn't bad, but was merely trying to protect themselves from those who saw them only as a means to an end. And if such an attempt came from them, I would be open to dialogue. I would make every effort to build new, healthy relationships with them, if, of course, they themselves wanted it. But I would not apologize for my actions. I would not pretend that calling the police on their mother was a mistake. It was not a mistake. It was a harsh but absolutely necessary measure. Jennifer herself broke into my home as if it were her lawful property. She herself defiantly refused to leave. She herself, with a smug smirk, challenged me, suggesting I call the police if I didn't like it. I merely took her advice. And all the consequences that befell her after that is entirely and completely her burden, not mine. The sun had almost completely disappeared below the horizon, coloring the sky in deep blue tones. I rose from the rocking chair and went into the house to make myself dinner. Inside, it was warm, cozy, and safe, like a real home. Everything here, every detail of the interior was mine, earned through hardship, chosen and acquired through my labor. I felt not the slightest regret about the path I had chosen, not for a single moment. My family, without knowing or wanting it, had taught me a fateful lesson. They had vividly shown me that sometimes those who demand the most from you deserve your help the least. They taught me that the ability to say a firm no is sometimes the most important and courageous act in life. They taught me that protecting one's own boundaries and one's right to happiness is not a manifestation of selfishness, but a basic necessity for the survival of the individual. I finished dinner, put the kitchen in perfect order, and settled on the sofa to watch a good movie. Outside stretched a quiet, serene night. I was home, truly home, in a space I had created, and I was, finally, truly free. I suppose there will be people who will consider me callous and cruel for cutting ties with my family, Some will undoubtedly say that I should have forgiven them and given them one more final chance. But all these people haven't lived my life. They haven't had to exist for years in an atmosphere of total manipulation, under the weight of an imposed sense of guilt, and under conditions of constant, unfounded demands. I acted as was right for me, for my mental health and my future. And if I found myself before the same choice again, I would, without a moment's hesitation, repeat my path. The movie played quietly on the large screen, casting reflections on the walls of the cozy living room. Outside, a deep, calm night reigned. I was home, in my life, and I had finally found that very hard-won and genuine freedom.